India is the world's most populous country. 1/5 of the world is Indian today, which means that every fifth person in the world is likely to be an Indian. And almost 50% of India's population is under the age of 25 and almost 65% under the age of 35, which is why the world is so tremendously interested in India, in putting its money into India, because this potential age group is the future of all the markets of the world. This potential age group is the aspirational group, which would build families, which would buy things, which would create markets, which would actually be employable, which would also be the labor force in the future, or maybe even in the present. So a lot of aspects about this age group is of great interest to India and to the world. Whether this age group is educated, is skilled, is able to have talent that can be put to use by the companies of the world, and also from India, whether this talent could also be sometimes exported to other parts of the world. But in India itself, it's not so simple, the job scenario. And why is it not so simple? Because to be a young Indian and to be also employable, there is a lot more aspects that we have to consider. And because the job scenario in India is far more complex than in many other countries. Not that jobs are easy to come by in any country today. It is a huge challenge across the world. But in India, our social structures itself create many more hurdles which are really not available in many other countries. First and foremost is the question of qualification. Now, where you are in India decides how much you can study. Because whether education itself is considered as very important, whether it's a top priority, whether your communities or your region or your religion or a lot of things centered around your state also define whether you will value education as a very top priority. So where you are and which state you are from and the state policies itself, the culture of the state towards education, towards its youth, in motivating them towards education itself will largely decide the qualification of this young Indians. And then also the family's economic condition also decides whether you can study. Now, some states in India are very encouraging of the fact that they want every young child to have an opportunity to study. Not every state has a high focus on education. So, to a great extent, the economic status of the family decides whether a young person has the opportunity to qualify. Because sometimes the necessity to work very early on and to contribute to the family's income decides whether the young person can qualify or even finish the basic qualification or even sometimes qualify further. Then your gender also decides whether you can study. Many parts of India are not very encouraging of girl children studying. Sometimes the girls may be studying much better than the boys, and sometimes even if they study really well, because of either the economic condition of the family or the region from where they come from, or also the social structure or the religion itself that they practice, many factors decide whether a girl will have an equal opportunity to study and to complete her qualifications. There is also a great challenge in India in some communities, or rather a hesitancy more than a challenge, to educate the girls, because the thing is that if the girls are educated, then their marriageability becomes a challenge, because if in certain communities the boys are not equally educated, or if they have not on par with the girls become overqualified and hence have a challenge in settling down or getting married. So to a great extent, the fact that education, qualification is so linked to the marriageability of a person and also linked to their gender becomes another deterrent. There are some states, of course, who actually are encouraging the girl children to match the boys or be on par with the boys in terms of their education, employability. They even encourage entrepreneurship in women. So there are definitely specific states in India which are hugely encouraging of women force getting higher because they strongly believe that when there is a great extent or increase in the number of girls, young girls and women coming to work, then what happens is it increases the overall job scenario. It also increases the fact about the family structures. It also obviously increases the capacity of young couple to be able to afford more things and to have a better lifestyle, which in turn changes the economic status of the state in terms of its ability to purchase, which is the purchasing power. So the next scenario or deterrent would be the caste, where you come from. Now, caste is so linked to education, which is so linked to the qualification, which is so linked to the employability, because in India, until very recently and until we became a modern nation, education as a right itself was not something that one could take for granted, because education by its very virtue was more limited to the people of the upper caste. And we're talking largely about Hinduism as a religion, but then in India, the ethos is Hinduism. The ethos is Hinduism, because even if we do have people from other communities, they do carry certain ethos which are unique to their own religions, but they are also influenced strongly by certain ethos from the Hindus. So what happens is that the caste also is a very large aspect of whether how much one could study or not. There are states where the caste actually is a deterrent, because to be able to get on to pursuing the courses or the qualification that one desires. In some other states, it's the very fact that you belong to the oppressed classes or the castes that probably did not get enough exposure or opportunities earlier are encouraged tremendously by the state to sort of, level up and get their rightful place in the society. So this again is decided by the state you belong to and what the state's large composition is of people is like, and also the state policies. As such, all states are supposed to encourage, on paper they do, but in reality, some states are definitely far more enthusiastic and far more pushy about getting its young people educated and in also ensuring that caste barriers are broken down and where the playing field is leveled, irrespective of the caste or community that one comes from and gender too. So some states really work hard in using education as a powerful tool of change, of qualifications as a powerful step towards a better opportunities for our youngsters, where it cuts across gender, it cuts across the community, it cuts across the caste. After all this, you also then need to get a job that matches to some degree what you have studied. So a lot of people with great difficulty do manage to qualify, overcoming maybe sometimes social structures, maybe overcoming gender challenges at home, maybe even going against communities. After a lot of effort, they actually manage to get their desired qualification. But then, are the jobs available that really are on par with what they have qualified? And sometimes what happens is that one qualifies in a particular degree, but just because we have qualified academically with a degree does not necessarily mean that we are employable or that our skill sets are really what the industry needs. So just being able to qualify cannot guarantee that you would get a job that matches the qualification, because if the qualification itself is just purely a degree but lacking the basic employability in the market, then even having a high qualification could still not give the right opportunities to our young people. We then come to also the language. So, language is a very complex issue in India. And a lot of our state education is most often in the vernacular language. So, is this a problem or is it not a problem? Would studying in a different medium other than English pose a problem? We could argue that it is possibly in some states. The literacy is very high, which means people's ability to think, analyze, articulate, to be actually employable is quite high. They may or may not possess a very comfortable ease with English as a spoken language. Many states in the South, if you see, I would probably take an example of a state like Tamil Nadu. Now, interestingly, a lot of the courses, in fact, a lot of our scientists today working in premier institutions across India have all studied from government schools from Tamil Nadu. But yet, it has not affected either their scientific acumen or their employability. So many of them up to the school level would have studied in a Tamil medium and then would have done their graduation and their post-graduation and other things in English. So what you might find is sometimes maybe a very Indian accent, but it has nothing to do with the fact that their skills which they have gained or their initial education that was gained in their native tongue affected anything about their employability or their skill sets. So in order to be able to comfortably study in our vernacular, we should actually have a very strong scientific background being built into our vernacular languages. Tamil as a language was lucky because for almost about 100 years, work has been steadily done in making sure that a lot of the scientific terms are also available in Tamil. So which means that even if you study in a Tamil medium, the knowledge that you're gaining is in no way less in comparison to somebody studying the same thing in English. So you're familiar with the concepts, you're familiar with the know-how, and you're familiar broadly with the terms. It's probably a slight confidence in English that you might lack, which is hardly a deterrent. But yes, if you do have a comfortable mastery in English, it definitely helps you or rather increases your ability to go and work in a lot more places, and sometimes even places that probably would match your qualification or give you opportunities to go beyond your qualification too, because English does open doors across the world, and having a good mastery over it could give us more choices. It is not about English being a more superior language or anything like that, but it is definitely a world's language, and being good at it helps us to be able to talk with the world and work with the world. But just knowing English and not having great skills is not going to take us far. So the whole idea is to be very robust in the skills that we pick up, so that the quality of the education that we gain is very important. If we have that same qualification in English with very sound concepts and our good understanding of those concepts, then it becomes a lot easier for us to also gain from all this. And why is caste such a big thing in India with relation to both education and jobs? A large part of India, especially the Indian business, is family run. It need not be only the trading community. Almost a large part of most of the business houses, be it the largest ones to maybe even much smaller ones, are all family run. So by default, what happens is people are pushed. One is probably by the caste they come from. sometimes by the communities they come from, sometimes because it is also held tightly by the families. People might just have a degree, they might have some qualification, but the qualification and the degree have nothing to do or have very little value or add very little value if they're going to go back into their family business. Sometimes, of course, they can bring tremendous change into those family businesses because they have qualified, because they've gained perspective, because they've gained exposure. Many of our youngsters go abroad, pick up a lot of know-how, come and put it back into the family-run businesses. They scale it up. They sometimes diversify. They sometimes carry a legacy, but then give it a lot of modern improvement. So just because we're taking up our family businesses, it's not a bad thing. It's in fact a tremendously strong thing, because what we're carrying on very proudly is a legacy. But continuously we must also see how can we keep the legacy and its pride intact, but can modernize it, can actually take it forward so that generation after generation it is picked up. But the point I was trying to raise is sometimes education and this the qualification, the education, and sometimes this hereditary business, they're interlinked, and not all hereditary business demand a qualification. And a lot of the qualified people might just go back into their family businesses and not even necessarily using their qualifications. But definitely the exposure to an education, to a college, the networks that you build over that period, the kind of thinking that you're exposed to, the kind of societal exposure that you gain to, all these definitely, even if one goes back into the family business, it's definitely a more enriched mind that would actually be taking on the business or taking it to the next level. So even in this scenario, a qualification or an education is so critical. So I was also telling about the fact about gender. Now, whether gender even allows you to work or not, but if economically backward, sometimes your working also is a compulsion irrespective of the gender. So then what happens is that if you're coming from an economically backward, sometimes communities, you're unable to study further because of the economic condition. And because you're not being able to educate yourself further, a lot of the job opportunities are by default cut off for you because of your family situation. And also, a lot of, we come to a very critical question of, again, gender, where unfortunately, a woman going to work, especially if it is not in the economically lower sections where the compulsion to work is needed because you need it for running the family. But once you climb up the economic ladder, a woman working is considered more as a luxury and not as her choice. Because a lot of people especially would consider a working woman as a reflection of the man's inability to support her financially. So the default setting in many communities is that a woman is educated because she can educate her children or she could run the house better, but a woman is not educated for her employability. A woman is educated for her, educated just to the right extent for her marriageability, so that she finds so that the family and she finds more educated grooms. But beyond that, her employability becomes a big uphill task because a lot of them do not want her to work, do not want her to grow in her career, do not want her to go higher than her spouse in the career. So there are a lot of deterrents also for a woman's career, and which may not allow her to really build her career. And then we come to how is even employment viewed in India. And to be looking at that, we'll have to look at what kind of jobs are there, or what kind of business entities exist. So, because the thing is that the laws in India regarding employment are not as strictly followed as they should be or could be. So, what happens is people are not very secure of the jobs that they have. Sometimes their employment is done very whimsically. They are not protected by the laws of employment as much sometimes as they can be or should be. And their own awareness of labor laws or their own awareness of protection of these labor laws, even sometimes the way the private entities might function, especially in the smaller entities, sometimes even in the larger entities. So what happens is that people are not sure that their jobs are secure and safe. So even, for example, taking a leave could sometimes mean you could end up taking a leave for your frequent absence from work could mean, it could be genuine. It could mean that you could lose your job. Or sometimes just the fact that you even take a day off could become critical. So that insecurity about what things could trigger a loss of job, whether it's something very fixed, which they're sure about the rules, or whether it is just based on the employer himself and their rules and policies. This becomes a very important aspect, not often discussed. So people actually also lose a lot of their jobs over an unscheduled leave of absence. It could be right from somebody who comes to do a daily, a domestic help at home, or it could be a driver, it could be people in different categories, some more on the blue collar. Many of them also lose jobs over this unscheduled leave of absence. Then comes the critical aspect of a lot of people get jobs because so a lot of people also lose jobs because of the critical problem that they face is that people from one community at top positions prefer to introduce or to hire or to absorb people from similar communities. So employment becomes community-centric rather than skill-centric or even qualification-centric. So there is always this knowing someone and getting in to a system that becomes a big aspect of one's ability to gain an opportunity. Then, unfortunate to say this, but there is this question of North Indians over South Indians. So there are a lot of prejudices against both these set of people, and depending on where you are and depending on how they are viewed, sometimes South Indians are favored and have an advantage over somebody from the North, and sometimes it is people from the North who have an undue advantage over people from the South. But both are very strong scenarios where automatically somebody gains employability just because of the region from where they come from. Then comes the big aspect of risk. In India, many of the risky jobs are not actually covered by proper insurance. Physical safety is not, human life is treated very easily and as though it's often of very little value. There are no proper cover, accidental cover or even health cover or any kind of proper insurance cover. So a lot of our young people and a lot of our people desperate to work sometimes take on highly risky jobs which actually are not protected, and if God forbid something really unfortunate happens to them, they and their families are left high and dry with very little to protect them from such a calamity, and especially if the person is the main breadwinner or likely to be the breadwinner. So the fear that always, that somebody is going to cut into your space You don't have a freedom to study what you want. You don't have a freedom to think that if you want to study further, you can. You don't have the freedom to say that I can say no to, say, a family business. We don't have the freedom that if I'm a girl, I can still dream and study. We don't encourage entrepreneurship in our youngsters enough. We don't really encourage girls to dream big. I was an entrepreneur at 22. I'm a first generation entrepreneur. And it was not easy because nobody even understood why a girl wanted to do anything on her own at all. You didn't have anybody you could talk to ideas with. Most of the people that you were talking to were people 30, 40 years older than you and who are men, because you have bright ideas and they are the only ones who can understand the extent of what you are talking about, or the fact that you have an ambition which has no connection to your gender. You're just actually talking about good skills. You're talking about dreaming of doing great work and being respected and valued for the work you do. So it's very, very difficult sometimes for our youngsters to have a valid dream. Are we really talking? And amidst all this, today the world, we're talking about urbanization, we're talking about globalization, we're talking about automation, we're talking about climate change, we're talking about rural people coming to cities in search of jobs. We're talking about young people who are qualified, overqualified, doing jobs that really are really not what they deserve. They should be doing jobs much better and worthy of their qualification. We have a lot of young people who have talent, who are very intelligent, but because of economic conditions, who cannot study. We have a lot of people who are pushed because of the communities they come from. We have people who are prevented from studying because of belonging to a certain caste. Gender is a big issue. Your marital status in India determines, especially if you're a woman, whether you are going to be employed or not. Your family support systems definitely determine whether you're going to be working or not. So many things. It's so easy to say, oh, India's 50% is made of 25 people under 25 years old, the population of India, or 65% of India's population is below the age of 35. And then just look at it as a market and looking at it as a job scenario. When you start peeling down the layers, it's like an onion. I mean, each layer you peel and you're shocked by how many factors actually go into preventing our young people from dreaming, shining. There is more to the story. I wish it would stop here, but it doesn't. Now, who really can employ our youngsters? Earlier, we had a variety of opportunities that were there. Because we had the government sector, which is obviously the very preferred because people see it as sort of a safe place to be employed, and there are a lot of other perks and benefits. We then had the private sector. Then we had the PSUs. We had quasi-government. We had the smaller startups. We had the SMEs. We had the MSMEs. We, of course, then had the semi-skilled, then the unskilled. So we had a whole layers and layers and hierarchy of people's opportunities for employment. And then, of course, also the startups came into the scene, and post-liberalization, a lot of things opened up. We had MNCs, we had the service sectors that opened up. Our manufacturing sector is still picking up, but a lot of these things definitely opened up a lot of opportunities. But today, our government jobs, there are vacancies, but they're not getting filled. There's a lot of churn because a lot of our government sectors are getting privatized. A lot of our public sector units are getting sold. Almost everything in the country is getting privatized, and privatized to a great extent to only a few business houses. Because of a lot of the tax changes and a lot of the structural changes, a lot of the SMEs and the MSMEs are struggling. So we have a growing number of young people with ambition, a growing number of people who might be having some degree of qualification, people across the country eager to have a better life, dreaming of wanting to have a better life, the whole world interested in our country, but we really don't have people. We don't have enough, the right jobs for these people. And we don't have the right people who are being trained enough or skilled enough to be able to get onto some of these jobs. Also, more critically, as a country, our young people are not trained to think. I started this YouTube series with a sincere effort to be sharing a lot of useful views and perspectives. It would be amazing to have some good, well put out, very politely worded ideas, suggestions, maybe counter suggestions, perspectives. I just started this a few days ago. And it's very disheartening to see the quality of some of the comments. Why would somebody want to put out perspectives? Thinking, and especially for a country of so many young people, thinking should be something that we get amazed about, excited about. The more ideas that we can bounce off, the more kind of perspectives that we can talk about. Where are the conversations? Where are the good conversations about how do we have an intelligent youth force? How do you have a curious youth force? How do we have interesting conversations about how we can improve our skills? How many of us can become entrepreneurs? I told you I started at 22. I would love if 65% of our population is under 35 and 50% of it is under 25. It would be so lovely to have so many of our youngsters firing our ideas. We do have. We are definitely improving in our startup communities. But if you really look at it, that's a very small bubble. This entire thing, what I have been talking about for so long, is the bulk of the India today. People who either have not been able to study, people who have studied but don't have the skills, people who have studied up to a degree but don't get the jobs they deserve, people who are held back by their communities, by their families, by their gender, by their caste, by their regions, people who don't have access to many other places or employments because people of other communities there are preferred over them. So many things are preventing a healthy opportunity to actually be available. The quality of the discourse today is really not encouraging. So the quality of the discourse is not very encouraging. It's not just the lack of the discourse itself, but even whatever little discourse is happening is really not where it could be or should be. When we are 1/5 of humanity and almost 50% of that is young people, we should be brimming with ideas and conversations and firing it up, and the energy levels of this country should be amazing. The whole world is ready to put its money into India simply because we are the markets the world wants. But to really become the market that the world wants us to become, we have to be employed, we have to be generating income, and we should be able to spend that income to improve our lifestyles. When our jobs itself are at stake, when our existence becomes a challenge, a lot of our youngsters are going to be going through a burnout because they are restless to gain an employment, they're restless to do more, but they don't know how. Because either they are not educated enough, or they're not confident enough, or they don't have the right skill sets, or they don't know where to go. Also, many jobs are actually reduced. On the top of it, we are having a lot of global problems, which is staring them in the face. So, why is this so linked to India being a very strong democracy. Why is it so linked to having a healthy follow up of our constitution in practice and reality? Because if you really go by the promise of being an Indian, every Indian is guaranteed the right to education, guaranteed by and promised by the state, many states, for the right to education, irrespective of who we may be, which community, gender, region, religion, whatever. Every child in India has a right to be educated. Every child in India is protected from child labor. Every Indian has a right to go into any other part of India for employment. We have a lot of these basic rights that are protected by our constitution. If we have to cut across where every Indian is richly rewarded for the work they put in, and if we want to become a very inclusive nation, which actually becomes the true market of the world, where we have a lot of prosperity for all our youngsters, education is the key. Education is the key. Better conversations around work opportunities is the key. Gaining the right skill sets is the key. Continuously upgrading our skill sets is the key. Maybe gaining better exposure to a language like English is the key. Even if we're studying in our own vernacular languages, increasing the scientific terminologies, the dictionaries, the knowledge capital in our vernacular should be increased. Overall, we're an amazing country, and it's so critical that this beautiful age group inspires the world rather than actually be disillusioned with the fact that it has a lot to offer, but there are not enough takers. Or even if there are takers, there are not enough people who can match up to those opportunities. I hope that this episode throws up a lot of thinking, a good conversations, healthy conversations. That's the whole intention of doing this video. I, more than anybody, would love to see a lot of youngsters come up and do well. It's not easy being an entrepreneur in this country. It's not easy as a young person to dream and to still make it happen. But many years later, I'm continuing, I'm persisting. And I wish each and every one of us really love our country so much and put out our best to make it one of the best places to be.